Thank you very much to the library, and we've been asked to very briefly introduce Selma, but I know many of you already know her very well. Just to say that we're delighted to be here
Kentish Town Library.
in Kentish Town Library, and this is Shoda, who's helped to pull the event together.
Frequent user.
Yes, frequent user. Selma is obviously, she's a celebrated activist, writer, and much loved Kentish Town person, and internationally loved person. Last year, she was chosen to represent Kentish Town on the City of Women Tube map, which we were absolutely thrilled about. Selma, just to say quickly, Selma founded the Wages for Housework campaign, which is celebrating its 50th anniversary this year. Yeah. And we've had a whole series of events, which we'll keep letting people know about. And I think on that note, we'll hand over to Selma.
Thank you.
Were you not going to say something?
I'm delighted to be here with Selma, and I can't wait to hear.
Thank you. It's very good of you to have come, and I'm very glad to be here. And I am a Kentish Town person, and I know quite a number of people in Kentish Town, and I know people generally in Camden, and I have to say we have a very distinguished guest today. A lawyer who stands up for people. What about legal action for, all right. Okay, the secret is out. Karen Pierce is here, and she is really somebody who has fought for her clients. You know, we have a lot to do at the Women's Center with people who need lawyers, and they can get lawyers, but they can't get good lawyers. They can't get lawyers who are principled and who will stand up with them and who will insist on telling the truth about the police and who will fight against domestic violence and make sure that women get what is our due and our right. And Gareth is one of those, and we've been able to go to her when we have knotty problems or somebody from her chambers, and we can ask them, what do you do now? You know, how can we get round this? I mean, who do you know who will represent us? You know, it's really difficult, but I'm not beginning at the beginning. In the beginning, I, for my sins, said that women who do the work of reproducing the whole human race, it's exhausting to think of it, that those women should get money for their work and not be impoverished for doing this job for society. And I thought, as a mother, that that was a reasonable thing to do, to ask for this money and to fight for this money and to tell the women's movement, shouldn't we get together and do this? And feminists said, no, you'll have to get a job. That's really where you will be liberated. Now, I had done those jobs that they are there for women, and they never liberated me, I have to tell you, and the wages were definitely de-liberating. Yeah. And so I felt that I wanted to do this, and I didn't know how to begin. And a woman came to me after this conference where we had been turned down by feminism, and she said, listen, this was 1972, she said, listen, the government is planning to take family allowance away from women. And that's wages for housework, isn't it? The penny dropped. I began to understand that if it doesn't have the name of of wages for housework, doesn't mean it's not wages for housework. If it's money and it comes to women and it's for the work that we're doing, it's wages for housework, and you could call it anything you like. And I said, yes, you're right. And called a few women together and said, let's have a meeting on Tuesday, or maybe it was Wednesday of next week, let's get together. And about 30 women turned up and said, yes, this is shocking. This is the only money women have. Many women have no other money, and we should fight for it. And we formed the Women's Family Allowance campaign from one end of the UK to the other. And we didn't have too much money for phone calls because phones charged you every call you made, and we didn't have that kind of money. We didn't have any money, as a matter of fact. But we did manage to get a campaign going. And one of the ways in which we educated ourselves was we decided to have a petition and go to the post office on the Tuesday. In some places it's on the Wednesday, where mothers went to get their money, and we would go there and ask them to sign this petition. And all over the country, either on the Tuesday or the Wednesday, depending on which was the day in that area that women went to collect their bread, we were there, a few of us, saying, Madam, will you sign our petition? And one woman spoke for many others who said the same thing. She said, this is 1972, going into 1973. It's very important what year it was. Will you sign our petition? And she said, I don't sign anything my husband hasn't looked into. That's where we were. Now we can measure where we are. We've made some progress since then. But we said, but madam, they want to take the family allowance away from you. They want to put the money into the men's pay packet. And she looked at me and she said, but that's the only money I can call my own. Where do I sign? And that was a big lesson to me, and a big lesson to all of us who heard it wherever and with whatever accent they spoke, that this was crucial to women's ability to live our own lives, to be independent of men a little bit, not much, but a little bit. And we heard all kinds of stories about women who had moved in with their mothers when the husband was violent, and the mother could provide a floor free of charge. And the women had the money for the food, and they could stay there until they could make other arrangements to move from a situation of violence. And that's where we began. And we didn't have a women's center, and we didn't have money for phone calls, but we had a movement, and we had an idea that was, and increasingly we found out, universal. All the women we knew who were grassroots women, working class women, said, yes, this is my money, he can't have it. It must be mine. And not only that, if he goes on strike, what are we supposed to do? We were being asked to scab on him. Now this is very relevant right now at this moment in time. There are enough strikes to test it. And the government was absolutely swamped with opposition that we had helped to stir up. And we kept it. We kept the family allowance, and we said to ourselves, this is the beginning of a movement, a real movement, a grassroots movement, a movement of mothers, and especially of single mothers. And we began from there, and a few years later, where did we squat first? On
Drummond Street.
on Drummond Street, right. And then they built around us and we had to move. And we didn't have a place and we got another place. And then finally, Ken Livingston, who was the chair of housing for Camden Council, we went to him, 2 women went to him saying, we really need a women's center. And he said, all right, you can have this little squat in King's Cross. And that's where we began in 1979 by then. And we built our movement. Now I want to tell you about our movement. I'm supposed to speak about this book, but what this book is really to tell people about how to build, not how to build a movement, but how we built a movement, and see what it is that you might want to learn from it, or learn not to do it that way, because that's what you don't think that's the way to do it, but you're beginning to think more clearly about your way. But it tells you, as best as I could, how to build a movement. And I want to say a couple of other things about this movement. First of all, it's for all women. That means it's anti-racist. You can't say all women and you only mean white ones. It's got to be everybody, and it's got to be everybody internationally. And it's got to be women who maybe have money, have husbands with a bit of cash. They may have money with cash, but that, with a husband that has cash, but that doesn't mean they have cash. It means they need their autonomy, their autonomous money, and they need the acknowledgement that the work they are doing is not wasting time, because they're not earning anything. It's true they're not earning anything, and they should be earning anything, but it's not a waste of time. And it's what makes the whole human race. And we who are mothers and grandmothers and grandfathers and fathers too, a lot of them, understand that it's a lot of work to make the whole human race. And it's all over the world that it's happening, so we want an international. We want an international campaign. And we have found that women in other countries say yes. We want a wage for the work that we're doing too. And we're in a number of countries, which we can tell you about if you're interested. Now, at the Women's Center, we began with a couple of organizations. Of course, there was a Wages for Housework campaign, but then Wages Due lesbian women said they wanted an organization, and they wanted to come in because lesbian women were also mothers, and they were afraid that their children would be taken because they were abnormal, you know. We have to remember we've come from a long way in a lot of places, and they were always in favor of having control of our children, and we were always fighting against that happening. And so lesbian women were part of the Wages for Housework campaign, and then Black Women for Wages for Housework was formed in this country and in the US too, where there was more, the campaign was growing, and finding women who said, this is central. And what in the US there was really extraordinary, because there was a movement for welfare, which was led by Black single mothers, mostly, who said we need to feed our children. And I remember I was at the US once when they had a demonstration and people told me it was going on, so I rushed to it. And there were these women saying, the moon don't wear clothes, but our kids do. And they wanted money for clothing for their children. And it was very true. How come they have money to send men to the moon, even if they become women? Even if they send women to the moon and the children don't have food and don't have clothing. What kind of a society? You know, this reproducing the human race, we're reproducing a dreadful society at the same time, and we don't want that. And the question of wages for housework was really the question of women being able to feed their children, to have their own autonomy, to have the sexual life that they want to have and the relationships that they want to have. And we were really quite excited. And then the English Collective of Prostitutes responded across the Manche, you know, across this piece of water in France. All the sex workers had gone out on strike. They did it by taking over churches. They went into the church and said, we need asylum from these brutish police who will not protect us, but steal our money. And there was an echo here of sex workers who said they had a lot of trouble in King's Cross, where our women's center were, precisely trying to make a living and trying to feed their children, especially single mothers, especially women of color. And they'd come from the north, a lot of them, and they called them Thatcher's girls because they knew that they were going on the game. They were becoming sex workers because of Thatcher's policies, which had taken what little money they had in the way of benefits, so that we were involved there, of it also taking over a church against police racism and illegality in King's Cross. And we just celebrated in the Church of the Holy Cross, we celebrated the 40th anniversary of our 12 days in that church, protesting the way women who had found one way of avoiding this low-paid work that women were doomed to, really. And also, they had flexible times so that they had childcare for some of the day, but most of the day they could be with their children, and this was they had decided to do, and the police, again, were disruptive, unpleasant, and dishonest. We won't even discuss that tonight, it's too big a subject. But the organizations began to relate to each other in a particular way that we helped to organize. We wanted to be sure that women were independent with their own demands, but they could not be taking from the independence of other women who had other demands which didn't need to clash with theirs. So they began to work together, keeping their own identity, but still able to work with other women who had other identities. And we began to build a women's center with a number of focuses, but we all worked together, and we worked very well together. I don't know if you remember Section 28. Thatcher decided that women who were lesbian, they were pretend families. I don't know how you pretend that children are not a family, you know, it is just, you know. But the lesbian women led the opposition, and it worked very well because we working with other women and men, of course, and we were able to defeat Section 28. Meanwhile, we were finding friends in other countries, not only the US, but we were finding friends in Ireland. We had a campaign there, and this campaign is now trying to change the Constitution of Ireland to express the caring work that women do, which is necessary. And we have a campaign in Thailand where they have thousands of sex workers who are very clever and very able to defend themselves against a brutal regime. And we have a campaign in India, and we have a fantastic campaign in Peru of domestic workers who talk about remunerated, that is paid, and unremunerated work, work that is not paid, and bringing women together who do housework which is not paid, and also do housework which is. So I'm sure I've left somebody out, and it'll.
Women of color, invisible.
Women of
Payday.
color. I mentioned Black Women for Wages for Housework, which was formed and was tremendously important in everything that we were doing, which was tainted with racism or blatant with racism. And we opposed that, and we made people understand that we were not going to have it, and we stood with women of color, who are now women of color in the Global Women's Strike. We call ourselves Global Women's Strike for various reasons. And the other organization, which was formed in the 80s, was Invisible. Women with visible and invisible disabilities. And all of these organizations, beginning with Invisible, fight for benefits. And the way in which women are treated by the establishment financially is outrageous. They don't think that women should be fed. You have to get a footballer like Rashford to complain to the government and say that he'll pay for their food because he remembers that his mother used to skip meals in order to feed him and his brothers and sisters. And now he has some money, he said, you know, and this is the society in which we are living. And it's not a good society, and we wanted to change. And the major way in which we're working to change it is that we want caring work. What the nurses are out today fighting for. We want that caring work to be respected, to be acknowledged, and to be funded. And they're opening a coal mine. They're thinking of sending people to the moon or somewhere else to live or something. But they have no money to feed our children, and we cannot tolerate that society. At the same time, we know that they are undermining every attempt to save the climate. Single Mothers Self-Defense fights for benefits for women, you know. Then SNS, Support Not Separation, an organization at the center, very important to us because it defends mothers whom the local government, including Camden, want to take our children and put them into care, and they support in the closed, the court that decides on whether the children should be taken is closed to the public, And the people can't even say when they come out, the women can't say what they said and what was said to them inside of the court. It's illegal. And they take our children and they often give them to violent men. And this has become a really big moment in the campaign that is run from this women's center. There's women's centers in other countries, like this one, not exactly the same, but more or less, defending mothers' rights and the rights of mothers against poverty, which is what we are fighting all the time. Now, I came to speak about a book, but I want to tell you, as I said, this book tried to explain some of the things we do and the reasons we do them, and you will look at that and see if it reflects what you know. This was the first anthology we did, called Sex, Race, and Class. We are 10 or 12 organizations here. Women of Color, I mentioned that. Global Women's Strike. Global Women Against Deportation. The All African Women's Group meets at our center. And there's asylum seekers. And we are anti-imperialist. And you know, when the British government went around the world stealing and murdering too. I think some of you might look at Al Jazeera and to hear various things about that. And women have come here who have been impoverished either because of the wars that they never had any part in making, or because of the climate, which has ruined their possibilities because there isn't any rain or there's too much rain, and because of the general poverty and impoverishment that the West has imposed on them, and they come here to get some little something that they're really entitled to because so much of their wealth is tied up here. We don't have it, but it's here. And we have to remember that all the time. And they use our center, and it's their center now too, of course, to fight for their right to stay. And Global Women Against Deportation has built a wonderful, is part of a wonderful network in the whole country. Now, wait a second. I can't read.
Okay, load it. It's a war and payday.
Oh, yes.
That's it.
How could I forget? Is that Lisa?
Yeah.
Oh, God, how could I forget? She's going to kill me if I forget. That's Women Against Rape, which has stood with women against rape and demanding that the government and the police take it seriously, because they don't. That's why there was a policeman that killed that woman, you know, because the police don't bother with rape. They don't need to. They can play dominoes or something instead. Or they can persecute Just Stop Oil. These people, 100 of them have been arrested, and they had a demonstration recently trying to stop the murderous way in which our world, our natural world, is being treated. What else have I got here?
Heyday.
Pardon?
Heyday.
Heyday. I forgot the men. They don't forget us. They don't forget us. Payday is a very important part of our Women's Center. There are a couple of things that Payday does. That they fight with prisoners against solitary confinement, and they've had to deal with the Royal Society of Psychiatrists, who said it's an enabling environment to be putting people in solitary confinement. you can't believe the kind of things they get onto that we need always to be telling people about, because nobody will believe that psychiatrists are so lacking in heart, so lacking in intelligence. They just, what they're not lacking in is money. They do pretty well on that, in that regard. And Payday works with prisoners in that regard. There's something else that is very important, not at our center, but among us, among me, among others. I'm a Jewish woman, and I am anti-Zionist.
Yes.
I am against what is happening to people who, in Israel, in Palestine. We stand with Palestinians, I and some others at the center. It's not in the center, but it's certainly from the center, because so many of us are horrified at the government and its connections, and every single major political party has shown that it is with Israel against Palestine.
Yep.
Labour, Tory,
Yep.
Lib Dem, even the Greens have said that they have looked. How dare they? How dare they speak in our name, defending people who are brutes? And we have to say no. And we know people who say no with us, and we are increasingly strengthened by the number of Jewish people in many parts of the world, beginning in the US, who are saying, we will not have this any longer. We will not be represented. We will not be represented by these brutes who run the Israeli state. Now, there are a couple of other things that I want to say before I finish. And one of them is, we've done a couple of books. This one is a man called Mumia Abu Jamal. He's almost 40 years inside. Tomorrow they're deciding whether he should have a new trial tomorrow. We're nervous wrecks. He's a wonderful man. He's a journalist. He's a delightful man. He's a clever man. He has a good sense of humor, and the only problem he has is that he's locked up inside. And they wanted to kill him, and the movement saved him and said, no, you're not to do that. Let's fight while he's still alive. And he's still alive, and we're still fighting, and we're hoping that tomorrow something important will happen, and he will be allowed a new trial. But he talked about jailhouse lawyers, because people are not like Gareth Pierce, you know. The lawyers cannot be, you know, if only they could all be like Gareth Pierce, we'd all be free. But they don't. They don't fight for you. They fight for their careers. They fight that the judges will like them, so they'll get a promotion to judgeship at a later point. And Mumia said that so many people inside are not properly represented, that some people begin to study the law to find out how to defend themselves. And they become, as soon as they win a bit as a result of doing their work in the books, the other guy says, could you help me out? I have a problem too. And the women say, I wonder if you could look at my case for me, because I'm not guilty, but this is what has happened and all the rest. And little by little, you know, a whole set of jailhouse lawyers appear inside of the prison. We don't know about them. We don't know how much they know, but we do know that they are fighting, and they're better lawyers than the ones they pay for. They defend them. They are part of what prisoners have to defend themselves. And I did a book with him, and he told the story, and he sent it to me every week or month a chapter and all the rest, and we got it all together. And we published that book just down the road here. Yeah, we published books, real books, good books. And then we met some people. A man and his wife who went to Africa, English people, and he had been in the war, and she was Irish, and he said, look, I want to do something that is for life, not killing. And he said to this woman that he wanted to marry, will you come with me to Africa and let's see whether we can help the people and do something productive. She said, I want 4 children. He said, as much as you like. And they went to Africa and they built a thing called Ujamaa, a wonderful politician, a man who really believed in the people, who had come from an African village and left the village at 12 and started to read and write then. A brilliant man, Nyerere of Tanzania, and we heard this man's story and we found out that he had written a whole report of their work on the land. And we said, we must publish this. And we did. It took us a while, a couple of years, but we published it. The socialist villages, the people were getting it together, the African people were getting it together. They were organizing their lives without politicians and people pushing them around, and they did fantastically well. And when they had some extra, their crop was good and they sold some, they divided the money equally among women and men. So they had pay equity well before we did. Those African women, they had pay equity. And I have to tell you something else about them. They had to deal with domestic violence. We know about that. And what they did was that the men did not speak to the men who were violent. And you know what? They would stop being violent because they were isolated among the men. In other words, the reason that men continue to be violent, aside from the fact that the police do not stop them, is that the other men do not stop them. And payday stands for that. Payday stands for men to stop being violent and to be with the women against that violence.
Yeah.
Okay. And so we started with the Wages for Housework campaign in 1972. And then we went to family allowance and discovered that family allowance was wages for housework. And then we read the discussions about passing the bill, and we discovered that the women who were in Parliament said women are entitled to wages, and that the woman wants to pass. Eleanor Rathbone, a woman from Liverpool, and she had pushed it for years, and she had put this bill before Parliament, and the men said, all right, we'll give it to the men. And they said no. They said it's the women who must have this money. And they said it was wages for housework. And so we had been fighting for what already existed in embryo, but not enough to stand up to. And today, we know that caring stands between us and illness and impossibilities and all kinds of disability, and that we are entitled as women, because men know about it too, entitled as women to have the right to money of our own for the caring work. And we're saying that the caring work that women do and the caring relationships that all of us aim for, we don't get it very much. It's a brutal society, but we want everything that we do it because it's in a caring way. Otherwise, we don't do it. And that, some people call that socialism. Some people call it communism. I call it wages for housework. Thank you very much. Well, there's the things you do. Yeah, I just have this, that'll be fine. And things I said that you didn't understand, or that you didn't want to understand. Yeah, spell it out. This is your chance.
So I just wanted to add, I had this the other night, I was reading a Walter Rodney book, and he had, he was remembering, he had this to say: I should say something about Selma James. What a very unusual woman. She sometimes, even more than CLR, had this habit of taking a foolish position and really indicating why that position was foolish. When Selma was finished indicating why it was foolish, one had very little doubt about its foolishness. And he goes on and on for its lovely reminiscence, but I was just wondering if you could share your memories about this reading group in the 60s and what came out of it.
Sure. Somehow some people started to ask me about, I didn't even remember it, and people began to ask me questions about it, and it seems to have become famous, that reading group. I suppose Walter, writing about it, helped to make it famous. There were a group of young West Indian, I was married to Selma James, who was a genius from the West Indies, who wrote 2 amazing books that you will know. One of them, a great book called The Black Jacobins, the history of the Haitian Revolution and how the Haitian slaves freed themselves. And that was really an important lesson and point of view which CLR introduced to us. Before I go on to this reading group, when I joined an organization which he led, we began with the assumption that everybody was capable of almost everything, but that we were never given the chance. We were put to doing the work that society needed, whatever it was, women and men, white and black, yellow and brown, whatever race we were, wherever we were exploited. And that only, you know, Connolly, this great revolutionary from Ireland, said, "None so fit to break the chains as those who wear them." And that was really CLR's starting point. And it's mine when we started that campaign, and everybody in our campaign agrees with that. They say, yes, none so fit. We are fit to break the chains, and we don't need this leadership pushing us around and giving us and being the vanguard of our movement. And they do fantastic work and become really autonomous people. Well, now I'll get back to the reading group, because it was terribly important that was, you know, the context of a group of people, young West Indians, mostly students, and We came together every Friday night, except over Christmas and August and that. And each week, somebody would give a talk on what they were interested in. I remember one of them was about Garvey. A Jamaican student wrote about Garvey, and it was so good it was published as a pamphlet. Marcus Garvey, and CLR used to say about Marcus Garvey, they talked about his followers in millions. There were millions of people that followed Marcus Garvey. He wasn't always right, but he was always strong against racism, and people came running. And then another talked about, he was a playwright. He was not a student, or he was studying some kind of machining or something to do with being a builder. And he was my dear friend, in fact, Stanley was. And Stanley gave a talk to us on the chorus in Greek plays. And he talked about, they were women, because it was the neighbors. He talked about the neighbors who then did judgment on the characters, on what the woman was doing, whether they liked what she did or thought it was dangerous or whatever. And this tremendous role that was given to neighborhood women in Greek plays, which I never thought of it again in a different way. And there were other things. Walter gave something to do with what his book ultimately was, which was to show that when the Portuguese went to Africa, they didn't think that the Africans were backward, because the Africans were just like the Portuguese, only they were dressed a bit differently because they were a warmer climate. And he wrote a great book on that subject when he finally became the writer that we know he became, and became a great leader of the movement in Guyana against imperialism and against exploitation, because they invaded Guyana, you know, in 1953 because they wanted trade unions. Remember that, please. They don't put it in the history books, but you heard it here, and I'm ready to fight to defend it. And so then we would discuss what they were talking about. And CLR, who was a historian and knew a lot, oh God, it's awful to be with somebody who knows so much. You know, you have to watch yourself, because you say the wrong thing, you say, well, that's not exactly true. You say, oh God, I give up. But it was always with a good temper that he did that. He didn't say you're stupid. He said, no, I think you have it wrong there or something. Anyway, he was a very nice man. I don't want you to think otherwise. But he would tell the students, look, you know, you should look at so-and-so has written a very interesting book on your subject. And he would help them, and they would be awed by how much he was useful to them, and that was every Friday night. And you know, sometimes we didn't. You know, I gave a talk on women. Surprised, aren't you? And I gave a talk on housewives, and I saw very much later that one of my formulations appeared in something that Walter Rodney wrote, and I was very thrilled by that, because he accepted what I had said, and I thought that was a very clever man. And so I must also be half clever anyway. And that was the group. CLR went to Africa after the Biafran War, and he met me already, but he told us about the ways in which the imperialists had used those who could read and write. And the same problem existed in Kenya. He told me that. That's one of the first things he told me when I got here from the US to join him, and we were married and then. He talked about how the intellectual, on the most primary level, even people who could read and write were turned against the population who were illiterate. And these were things that you began to understand. You began to understand your world. You began to understand what your problems were as a person who wanted to change the world, and you began to understand what forces were likely to stand with you. And Walter picked up everything that CLR had to offer. And I have to tell you one story on Walter, which I love best. Walter never wrote me a letter, and I never wrote him a letter. I'm not a very good correspondent anyway. And he went to Cuba, and there used to be those, I don't know if they have it anymore, these letters that are blue, and you just write in them.
Yeah, man.
And he wrote me one of those, and he said, "Dear Selma," he said, "man is in charge here. Love, Walter." He didn't mean men. He meant human beings.
Yeah.
He meant that people were not under the imperialist thumb, were not under a dictatorship, were not being pushed around, but that man, the human species, was in charge. And when he wrote it, I said, "Oh, that is a revolution." And I understood what I had not understood from many other things that I had heard about and heard tell about. But Walter gave me the truth. He was a good man, was Walter. He was difficult sometimes and very stubborn. But he was a good man, and he meant well.
Any more questions? Is anyone? Oh, we have a young lady here.
How do you organise women who don't want to be organised?
How do you organise women that don't want to be organised?
Speaking as a South Asian woman.
You can't.
Speaking as a South Asian
You
woman.
can't. What you can do is you can tell them things, and they have to find out that what you are telling them is what they want to fight for. That's the only way you can do it. You can't organize anybody who doesn't want to be organized. But I have to say that at different moments, at different times, everybody wants to be organized, and this is becoming that moment. This is becoming that moment, and it is precious beyond belief because it doesn't always exist. And we saw a movement that came up like sparks with Jeremy and John MacDonald, Jeremy Corbyn, and they threw it away by begging pardon for what they should have been saying. They defended Palestine, they defended Israel against Palestine, which was against their principles, and why they did it, I don't know. It's a mystery. If you find out, let me know and I'll pay you. Why they should do that against a perfectly good movement which all of us were excited about, which everybody wanted to succeed who was anybody. Of course, the Sun didn't want it, and the Daily Telegraph didn't want it, but who cares? They're nothing. When we're strong, they are nothing. When we're weak, they're everything. And we were strong and they were weak at that time. And it looks like this is a different kind of movement because it has no, what's his name, the man from the RMT? Mark Lynch. He's good. He means well, but he's not a mass leader. He's the leader of the RMT, and that's great. We can use him, but we have, and so many people are active now, and increasingly, well, somebody from the center you should talk about how many people there are in the anti-deportation movement. There are thousands, there are people who spend their lives trying to welcome the people who survive the marsh, what you call it? The channel, who survive, and they come and they feed them and they give them water and they give them warm clothes and they give them a place to stay and they call it their beach work. That's not a career. That's not a career that pays. It's a career that pays in life and in renewal and in compassion and love. And if you want to work for that, good luck to you, but you have to find somebody to fund you. You do, and we do that all the time because we must have movements that have people like that all the time. But you can't, when that moment comes though, you have to use it and protect it. And what's the guy's name, the filmmaker? Ken Loach. Ken Loach, every time he got up to speak, when Jeremy was leader of the Labour Party, he would say, we have a movement. It is precious. We must protect it. I said, this is the man who is telling us the truth. I'm old enough, I lived through the movement of the 30s and it changed me. It made me. I am a product of the 30s. And then I went through the 60s and I remember that movement and we thought it would last forever, but it didn't. We had Thatcher soon. And now we have the chance of another movement. And they're going to come and try to destroy it. And there is something called, what is that, the Israeli Front?
Stand up to racism.
Stand up to racism. They won't stand up to Israeli racism.
No.
That's what they're here to do, is to get us to stand up to Israeli racism, to support it. We know about that. People know about that. People know they're trying to undermine the movement and that the Israelis are paying them to do it. But people are wise to them, and increasingly, who's not wise as the MPs, but they never knew anything anyway.
Or the Prime Minister.
Or the Prime Minister. You're rude.
I am.
You belong with us.
Would anyone else like to ask a question or have a query about something someone said?
Have I left something out that's terribly important? Nina?
No,
The soil, yeah.
the soil, the soil, the caring people and planet.
Yes, it is very important. It's absolutely central, and I started to speak about it. We don't say wages for housework now. We say wages for housework, of course we do, but we call what we're demanding a care income because that is more accurate.
No. You got a new
And
t-shirt.
because we want to be taking care not only of people, but of the natural world. And we are talking about now the renewal of the soil and the way that that can transform the climate. Now that's a whole subject, and if you're interested, we have a video that we can send you, and you can have another meeting here about it. And I would certainly be glad to be part of that meeting to discuss the whole question of what Andhra Pradesh, the women in self-help groups are doing and transforming the land and their relationships. You know, once women are independent, you know, you can't keep them down, you know. They're really diabolical. We really come into our own. And we say a care income is what we want, and that's what women all over the world can see as something that they want and need and are ready to organize to get. That is...
Yeah, that was it, Selma, on your list.
Yes.
We've done.
There's a whole piece on that
Yeah.
in this book, and a whole history of the Wages for Housework campaign and how we got from Wages for Housework in 1972 to a care income caring for people and planet. That story is told here.
Well, yeah, the survey, Sel. Have the contact survey.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
Why don't you do that?
Oh, it's upside down.
Oh.
You do it, Shraddha. You've been doing
This is a wonderful international survey that we're circulating at the moment, and we're asking mothers and caregivers, what do they want? And it's connected to a care income. So if you're in Thailand and you're looking after the land and farming, what government help would be able to improve your life, how you'll be able to support your family, and that's around the world, also in Peru, USA, UK, and in fact we have about 27 countries that are participating in this. It's an anonymous questionnaire survey, and it's multiple choice, so anything that doesn't relate you can skip over. And we're going to look at and have this analysed for next year and say to governments around the world just exactly what caregivers and mothers do need and want. And that relates to a care income, looking after the land, looking after your family, looking after disabled members, your community, any caregiving work that you do as a mother, carer, grandmother, grandfather, etc. So if you'd like to take one of those, they're here with a wonderful array of the books that Selma's spoken about also. And we take card and cash.
And this is a Christmas t-shirt just come out.
Wonderful Christmas, hot off the press.
Oh, I got
connected to
one.
this.
And you can, as soon as the summer is out, I'll be wearing it. You'll see me from a mile away.
This has a QR code on it as well, so if you want to snap it onto your smartphone, you can also take the questionnaire and do it at home at your leisure. And circulate with your friends and family.
Garrett, did you want to say something?
Into this Selma, and I've been richly rewarded.
Thank you.
And an incredible evening.
It's an incredible evening.
Well, coming from her, I appreciate that. Is there anybody else who has a burning question?
Yeah, it's Nick Durant, our very own librarian here. Nick, would you come closer to ask a question?
I wanted to ask about, because in Iceland, I think it was it 1975, 76? There was a general strike of all women. I think it was only one day. They all went on strike.
In 1975, the strike
It
in
kind of
Iceland.
transformed Iceland.
Yes.
And of course, there have been male prime ministers since, and some of them made terrible messes. But it really has
Male
transformed
prime
Icelandic
ministers
society. So I wondered if you'd
The
made.
male prime ministers there have been.
I wondered if your campaigns have made any links with the movement in Iceland or learned anything in particular.
Has our campaign made any links with the movement in Iceland?
Oh, yes.
Or learn anything.
Or learn
We
anything from it.
absolutely have. First of all, we put it in a film that we did. The BBC used to have something called Open Door. It was a series they used to let just people, normal people, get a program, and we made a program on wages for housework, and it ended with pictures from the Iceland women's strike because the BBC paid for us to get those photos. They were so astonished. And when they had a meeting of that, the whole open door thing, he said, how come there was no word about the Iceland women's strike except the women's group that I'd never heard of? They put it on the television. And nobody could answer, but that's what we did. And that film is still available. We still show it from time to time.
It's on the
It's
website.
called All Work and No Pay.
It's on
And it ends
YouTube.
with the Iceland, pardon?
It's on our Global Women's Strike YouTube channel.
All work and no pay.
It's on our Global Women's Strike YouTube
Channel.
channel. And you can watch it and
It's
have
called All Work
fun.
and No Pay.
And it has our music that women from the campaign have written, called what would happen if we women went on strike. There'd be no breakfast in the morning, there'd be no screw at night. There'd be no women waiting you, it would be all right. Anyway, you'll hear the rest of the words, which are also clever, on that film.
And the Old Women's Center, the first thing you saw was a blow-up. There was a massive blow-up, biggest one I've ever seen of the Iceland strike. And that's how many of us first heard about it, was when we entered the center and saw this huge blow-up that was like as long as one wall. It was fantastic.
We made contact with the women, and in 1975, they went on strike on the day that the International Women's Year began, and they had a strike in 1985, and the International Women's Year came to a close. And we sent a message that Iceland women opened the decade, but the women of the world are closing it together, and there was a great roar. We practically, not really, but practically heard the roar from Reykjavik to London. We were trying to, but the problem, we get into some other thing there, because the problem then was that the women's movement thought that women should not be carers, that women should be workers outside the home. And the result was that people with disabilities and people my age who had disabilities and children, everybody was in institutions which the women in Iceland said were terrible. And that's not what they went on strike for. They didn't go on strike for money for housewives, though. If they had gone out on strike for housewives, the housewives would have transformed the way that people are taken care of, because they would have made sure that they decided what kind of care they wanted, and with whom, and how much in institutions, and how much at home, and what kind of care they wanted, which people have a right to decide about. Nobody can say how you want to live. You only can say that. And you must have the power to say that. And there's enough money, there's enough billionaires in the world, we don't ever have to need anything. But they don't give us that money, they keep it, because if they gave it to us, we wouldn't slave for them. That's not economic. That's freedom. This is a mistake. Well, we don't think so. We think differently. We think if you're not doing things in a caring way, then you're doing the wrong things.
Very good.
Well, listen, can I have an appointment on the question of changing the soil? Can we have a meeting in January here on the whole question of the movement in Andhra Pradesh and of people taking care of the soil and raising their income and various things? And we have photos, because we have people who went there to look for us and photographed it, and we can show the photos here as well. Can we have this lovely space? I didn't even know you had it. And I've been living, you know, some years next door practically.
We didn't really know we had it either.
He said, we didn't know we had it either.
But now you know, right? Can we do that? Can we come back at the end of January
To the centre.
and speak about the soil
Yeah.
and about the women who are making a movement of extraordinary proportions in India?
Yeah.
What you say?
Yeah, fabulous. And we got some. Selma, there's one more question here. Final question.
Yes, please.
How do you deal with ambition in the movements, and also women like Theresa May, Margaret Thatcher, right-wing women?
You don't really want to know what I do. No, I can't do that. Well, thank you. Thank you. When this will take me a few minutes to say, when the women's movement began, I was there. We were all there. A lot of us were anyway, and we said we don't want any more hierarchy. But we wound up with women joining the hierarchy, and they became exactly like the men who had been there before them. As soon as they got any power, they knew that the way to move up is to do what the men did, and to agree with them, and to forget us. And to forget us. And so we, in the Wages for Housework campaign, by 1972, we knew and began to know even better that we could not, we had to fight that. We had to say that Margaret Thatcher is not a sister. She's not a brother either. She's nothing except someone who was hated. And when she died, we saw that the miners came to celebrate in Trafalgar Square, and we with them. Thousands came to Trafalgar Square to enjoy the fact that Margaret Thatcher was dead. I feel so sad for her. Nobody should be hated as she was, but unfortunately she deserved it. And there has been a tendency for the women to move up, and as they move up, they move further and further away from the rest of us, from the grassroots. So we have to be very careful when we're getting those people who want to organize for the first time. We have to make it clear that's not where we're going. And your question is a very important one about how you handle this ambition. You don't let them into your organization. You do not let them in. You can give them a cup of tea.
Maybe.
But more than that, worry about it, because they've come to take you over. And you don't need them to take you over. You need them out of your way. The problem is they are in the movements that we form. And sometimes people don't like to be critical of others in a movement. Well, I have to tell you something that I think is very important, and that is that every movement has within it the struggle of class. Within the movement, we think we're in a trade union and it's all our son. No. They're fighting for the employers, some of them, to move up, to be acceptable, to get a better job. Well, I have to say Mick Lynch doesn't look like that at all. To his credit, he looks like a real guy. He looks like he wants to do it. I don't know that he knows what to do, but he knows to do it and not to take advantage of our struggle except to build our movement. He has that. But a lot of people don't. And we meet them in the movement. That same thing happened recently. Where's Michael?
Hi.
My friend in crime, my brother in crime, he and I are both members of the International Jewish Anti-Zionist Network. We're not the only ones, but we are two of them. And we have to be very careful because this thing calls itself Stand Up to Racism. And then the Israelis come and wave their flags and we say, but the Israelis, they have apartheid. You are hiding that. They say, no, that's nothing to do with us. We only deal with racism in this country. Excuse me. And what were you supposed to do with South African apartheid? Forget it? Yes. The answer to that is yes. I give it, they won't. But there's an international movement, and that must be respected. And if they're killing Palestinian children, it's my children they're killing. It's my children, because all children are my children. And how can I think that they're not? You know, there's a way in which they give us so much garbage that we don't know what to think half the time because they're so full of nonsense. And there's only one line, and that's anti-racism. And you watch them. They're very nasty, these people. And they get others arrested. That's what I understand from people in our movement who have had to clash with them. And they're there as a front organization for Zionism, for apartheid, for the ways in which they have supported Israel. Look, it's very hard to do this. It's very hard to be Jewish and then to find that the one state that's supposed to represent you is the worst state around. Well, that's it. You have to know it and oppose it. And because you are Jewish, they have trouble calling you anti-Semitic, but they don't. They do it anyway.
Yeah.
That's right.
They do it anyway. You're the wrong kind of Jewish woman. Yes, me. I'm proud of that because I'm also Palestinian. And I think that's part of how you deal with people who are ambitious. You spell it out. You say you're not here to win for the movement, you're here to win for yourself. You really want to move ahead and you want to use this movement to do it. You don't belong here. Go to the employers and just spell it out that you have no place here with us. I don't know any other way. I don't know any other way, because we need these movements and we need to fight it out in these movements. You know, that's what we have to do. It's a lot of work, and we would like to be doing other things, but we better do this because nothing else will happen unless we clean up our own movement.
Thank you very much, Selma, for the wonderful history of the 50 years and the questions and answers, secret memoirs. We've loved it. Thank you. Thank you for being Selma James, Kentish Town.
Thank you. Towards the end of January, we'll work with Nick on the exact date. Come back and we'll discuss the soil.
Right.
Thank you very much. You were very kind to us.
Yes. Yes. If anybody would like to fill in contacts